So obviously Cedar Point shocked the world with the announcement of Sirens Curse, which is supposed to open in 2025. This really came out of nowhere, like a Vekoma tilt coaster coming to America. That's very exciting. Obviously there's supposed to be one coming to Texas, but there's been a lack of communication from Codaland, so who knows how that's going. But Cedar Point claims that Sirens Curse is going to open summer of next year, so this is very exciting stuff. And if I had to bet money, I'm going to guess that this will be the first tilt coaster in the United States to open. Because this announcement came out of nowhere and it's such an exciting concept, this feels like one of the wishlist ideas come to life. So I feel like now would be a great time to make a wishlist video for Cedar Point, because a tilt coaster was literally on my Kings Island wishlist video that I made a while back. But I just want to talk about Sirens Curse for a little bit because I feel like all the storylines that surround this roller coaster are very interesting. So if you don't know the story, this coaster was originally supposed to go to Energylandia. For whatever reason, that project fell through, so Six Flags bought it, and they were trying to send it down to Six Flags Mexico. Like, they literally had the track on site, and then they had permit issues, so they sent it up to a different park, and that park ended up being Cedar Point. So it's just crazy that we already have a massive consequence of the merger of Six Flags and Cedar Fair. Cedar Point is already a big winner of this corporate merger. Like, obviously, if it never happened, Cedar Point would not have gotten this roller coaster. It probably would have gone to a different Six Flags park. So I just find it really interesting that the merger, it felt like it hasn't been that long and we've already had a massive consequence of it. Like, I've avoided talking about the merger on the channel because honestly, it made me kind of depressed. I thought Cedar Fair and Six Flags merging was a terrible idea. I thought that it would really chop down on the competition, and I felt that both chains would add less attractions every year if they're one giant company. This first major decision, at least publicly facing decision, is very exciting. So we're off to a good start, but we'll see how this plays out going forward. I'm still very nervous about how this will play out. Another thing that I want to mention is that I went to Not Scary Farm a few days ago, and they have a show called The Hanging, and they make a lot of jokes. It's basically a recap of the year that happened. So they had a bunch of jokes about how Magic Mountain and Knott's Berry Farm are the same company now, and as a theme park nerd, I thought that was hilarious. So that's a second consequence that I've seen of the merger that's actually really good. So far, this new Six Flags company is 2 for 2, but I'm still concerned, as I mentioned. Anyway, we kind of got off track. We're going to talk about Sirens Curse for a little bit before we dig into other wishlist videos. So this layout is very exciting. Obviously, the big marketing push for this thing is that it has the tilt coaster gimmick. I'm really interested to see how it feels. I've been on a few modern Vekomas, but I have not been on a modern Vekoma that is a thrill ride. Like, I've been on Big Bear Mountain, I've been on Tron, and I've been on Cosmic Rewind, but I've not ridden a full-scale Vekoma in Europe. So it's really exciting that we're getting one at one of our biggest amusement parks in the country. And this looks like a really solid layout. Outside of the tilting gimmick, you have 2 inversions and 13 airtime moments. I'm interested to see if that number is accurate though. That does seem a lot for a ride that is not the longest thing in the world, so we'll see what happens. I'm really curious to see how this tilting drop feels. I'm sure it'll be really intimidating, it'll be really imposing, but is it gonna have airtime? I'm not really sure, because after, if you're in the front row, you're basically gonna be released right into the valley of the drop, so I'm not sure how much of the drop you're gonna feel. The back row is obviously gonna be a different story, but I wonder if it is gonna feel like airtime or if it'll just feel like weightlessness. So I'm very excited to see how that feels. I am a little concerned about the vests on the coaster train. From what I understand, they shouldn't be too restrictive. We go over to Gatekeeper and Valraven in the same park, especially Valraven because it also has a steep drop. I feel like the vests on Valraven can kind of kill the airtime, so I'm interested to see how it compares to Sirens Curse. I also find it kind of interesting how Cedar Point is going to market the height for this attraction. I've heard some disputes between 140 feet and 160 feet, so I imagine the structure itself before it tilts is 140 feet, but when tilts to face the drop, I imagine the back row might be, or I guess the edge of the track that's highest up will be 160 feet off the ground. So that's just kind of funny that the ride will grow 20 feet just by tilting. So that's pretty interesting. But let's dig into the rest of this layout. So you're going to start off with a diving element. This reminds me of the second element on Stardust Racers. It looks pretty similar, and since both coasters are supposed to open next year, I'm interested to see which one is better. I hope both of them on Stardust Racers, I hope they both have airtime. All three of them have airtime. That's a little confusing. After that, you get the first of two inversions. Both of them are like Heartline style rolls. So that's really exciting. A lot of people have pointed out that obviously Maverick lost its Heartline roll. So it's really cool that Cedar Point is adding a roller coaster with a Heartline roll. I'm sure that both of these rolls on Sirens Curse will be nowhere near as forceful as the one on Maverick was, or the one on Velocicoaster, which is the one that we've been able to experience. But I'm sure it'll still be an awesome moment. So that's just really cool that it ties into an existing roller coaster at Cedar Point, even though this layout was not designed for the park. That just worked out really well. It looks like the second roll is more traditional. It's kind of profiled like the Mosasaurus roll on Velocicoaster. So I feel like that one might be a little better. Like I'm just not sure how this upward roll will feel in comparison, but it's good that they have a different dynamic at least. But I don't think it'll be as intense as the one that Intamin made on Velocicoaster. Outside of that, this roller coaster does have like a triple down looking thing. So I'm interested to see how those airtime hills hit. The first two are like banked, so I hope they give sideways airtime. I'm a little concerned they won't, but we'll see what happens. It looks like the final hill on the triple down is like the most traditional airtime moment, so I imagine that one is going to be my favorite. After that, there's this twisted airtime hill. It's kind of like a non-inverting loop, but it's not profiled to be a non-inverting loop. That looks like a really solid airtime moment. I'm hoping for another great moment of twisted airtime. And then after that second inversion, you're gonna go through a couple of airtime hills to end it out. I hope this is like the finale for Steel Vengeance. Obviously not as intense as that RMC airtime, but I hope it's a few decent pops before you end the ride. So it's not the longest ride in the world, but it's very exciting. This is definitely like a wishlist style idea come to life. My biggest concern is the vest and the duration, but honestly those are two total nitpicks. I did get to ride Flying Cobras at Carowinds, which did have the vest. The vest on that ride was not the most restrictive thing in the world. It wasn't as restrictive on the vest on Valraven, but Flying Cobras is not a ride that has airtime, so it's not as easy to tell, you know? So hopefully the vests aren't an issue. Another thing that could be a problem for this ride is smoothness. Like obviously modern Vekoma is known for very smooth rides, but I do want to point out that this track has traveled a lot. Like I don't know if it actually made its way to Energylandia, but the fact that it went all the way down to Mexico and then it's gonna go all the way up to Cedar Point, that's a lot of traveling. So I don't know if it'll ride very smoothly. Wonder Woman Flight of Courage at Six Flags Magic Mountain sat in a parking lot for about a year because of pandemic delays, so I'm worried that Sirens Curse could be Cedar Point's version of Flight of Courage, because Flight of Courage is not as smooth as it should be, and most people think it's because of the construction delays. I could be totally wrong though. I hope it's smooth. It probably will be smooth, but that is something to keep in mind. Another storyline that is really interesting is the fact that since Cedar Point and Six Flags Magic Mountain are now sister parks, does the fact that this Six Flags Corporation gave Sirens Curse to Cedar Point over Magic Mountain mean that Cedar Point won the coaster war over Magic Mountain? If this new company is going to give priority to Cedar Point over Magic Mountain, it kind of means that like the legendary battle that these parks have had for decades and decades is over, and it seems like this coaster means that Cedar Point won because they sent it up there even though they could have sent it to Magic Mountain. It does seem that Magic Mountain has a coaster project in the works, but we have not had an update on that for a long time, so I don't know if they canceled it or delayed it or what. Another thing is that California regulations are probably more tedious than those in Ohio. It seems like they really wanted to have this attraction ready to go for 2025, so if you sent it to California, you probably would have had to delay it at least a year, maybe more. because we just have so much more red tape over here in California than in Ohio. So maybe I'm just looking into it too much, but it does seem that Cedar Point has won the coaster war. I'm also curious to see if the onboard audio is going to work beyond the opening year. Like, that might just be a gimmick that is operational for the first year, but in year 5, 6, 7, 8, and beyond, is it still going to be working consistently? That'll be interesting to see. I will point out that the sound effects on the Wild Mouse coaster were working in 2024, so that's a promising development. But I don't think Cedar Point would have had the onboard audio if it wasn't created for Energylandia. Also, with the addition of Sirens Curse, the top 10 roller coasters at Cedar Point are absolutely insane. Like, most parks have a top 3, maybe a top 5, and I think Cedar Point's gonna have a top 10. I did a video ranking every coaster in the park, and I believe this ride will be better than Gatekeeper, which means that Cedar Point is gonna have 4 B&M roller coasters. You got the Strata, you got the Giga, and of course you have the RMC, the original Hypercoaster, Maverick, and of course this ride. That's an insane top 10. I love the B&Ms, all 4 of them, so I think this is just an absolutely loaded collection of coasters. In my opinion, I think Gatekeeper will be the 10th best in the park when both this ride and Top Thrill 2 are running. And I feel like Gatekeeper would be the best ride at a lot of other parks if you just dropped it in there. So the fact that that ride is 10th in the park is just insane, at least in my opinion. Another thing that is kind of funny is the fact that the logo for this ride does not have any color. Like, it's just black and plain. So it does look a little rushed. I do like that the tilt coaster mechanism is in the end for Sirens. That's kind of creative. But it is a little weird that the colors don't match the theme that Cedar Point went with. I'm surprised they didn't go with a more generic name to fit the red colored track and the gray supports, especially since this ride is so unique. It doesn't really need a theme to be marketable, so that was just an interesting decision. Another more obvious storyline with this coaster is obviously the failure of Top Thrill 2. It's possible that Six Flags just threw this in here to distract from Top Thrill 2. It's a possibility that that ride may not even open next year, and Sirens Curse may just be a compromise for park guests. So that's another very interesting detail. It seems that Zamperla might be cooked because Cedar Point is going with a different company. So it's weird that they built 2 coasters in a row for this park and then they just threw in this Vekoma out of nowhere. So this new Six Flags company may never work with Zamperla ever again, especially since now they have King Dakar in the same chain, which could have used the same reimagining that Top Thrill Dragster got. But there are rumors that King Dakar could be biting the dust, which is really, really a shame. Like, I don't know if I'll get to ride that because I'm in Southern California and that's on the other side of the country. I am grateful that I got to ride the original Dragster though. But since Six Flags Great Adventure is losing the height record to Falcon's Flight, it might be time to say goodbye to King Dakar, but that's an entirely different discussion. It'll be interesting to see if Six Flags works with Vekoma though, so I'm hoping that this ride is more successful than Top Thrill 2 was in its opening year. I'm pretty positive that it will be, even though this tilt coaster is kind of a prototype. There was one from 2002, but probably going to be the first modern tilt coaster, so there are possibilities for delays and technical issues, but I trust Vekoma more than I trust Zamperla, and I'm sure that's the case for most of you as well. So there's just so many storylines related to this attraction that it's very, very fascinating. It's very exciting, and in my opinion, this looks like a great fit at Cedar Point. But let's move on to the actual wish list for Cedar Point. So I have 5 ideas to improve this park. Some of these are completely unrealistic and some of these are very realistic, at least in my opinion. But let's dig in with number 5, which is a modern hypercoaster. So obviously Cedar Point has plenty of hypercoasters. I believe they have 5 roller coasters over 200 feet. Obviously you have the original with Magnum, you have Steel Vengeance, you have Valraven, and then you have the Giga in Millennium Force and the Strata with Top Thrill 2. So that's absolutely insane. but the dive and the hybrid coaster aren't really traditional hypercoasters. So the only traditional hypercoaster in the park is Magnum, which is the original one. So I really love Magnum, but I feel like Cedar Point could benefit from a modern hypercoaster. And the three manufacturers that I would absolutely love to see would be Mach, Intamin, or Vekoma. Like, if Sirens Curse is a massive hit for Cedar Point, I wouldn't be surprised to see them work with Vekoma again, and maybe they would give Vekoma a shot at a full-scale hypercoaster. That could be really, really, really cool. Obviously, it's been well documented on this channel that I'm a Mach Rides fanboy, so I'd also love to see a Mach Rides hypercoaster at Cedar Point. And in my fantasy world, a modern Intamin would also be incredible, but I'm doubtful that this Six Flags Corporation is going to work with Intamin. But who knows? This is at number 5 because it's a very, very, very nitpicky thing to add to Cedar Point because, as I said, they have 5 hypercoasters. So I would say this is pretty unrealistic. At number 4, we're moving up to an extreme spinner coaster. Obviously, when you hear extreme spinner, you think of Mach Ride, especially Time Traveler. I absolutely love Time Traveler, and I am down bad to see more Mach Rides extreme spinners in the United States. And obviously, Cedar Point would be an incredible fit, so that could be really, really, really cool. Personally, I would rather see a Mach Rides extreme spinner go to Kings Island. I just feel like that would be a better fit there, but it would certainly work very well at Cedar Point. Another idea that I want to throw out there would be a Vekoma spinning coaster. Because Sirens Curse is opening, this is opening up a whole world of possibilities for Cedar Point. Obviously, I mentioned a Vekoma Hyper, but Vekoma developed a spinning coaster for Disney with Cosmic Rewind, so I wonder if you could take that ride system and make it a thrill ride and have it at Cedar Point. And that could be Vekoma's competition for Mach Rides. So maybe in a dream world, you could have a Mach Rides extreme spinner at Kings Island, and you could put a Vekoma extreme spinner using the Cosmic Rewind ride system in Cedar Point. That would be so, so, so cool. Like, imagine a Cosmic Rewind style ride with like inversions and airtime moments and stuff like that, you know? That could be really, really, really cool. But moving up to number 3 on the list is an Egenica style roller coaster, like a modern SNS 4D coaster. So the United States has X2 and there's just nothing else like it on this continent. So it would be really, really cool to see Cedar Point do something like that. This is probably another really, really unrealistic idea. But since Cedar Point just has everything, you know, you can go off the board a little bit, since this is definitely the crown jewel of the new Six Flags chain, as proven by Sirens Curse. That ride would just be absolutely wild, and it would be unlike anything that is at Cedar Point. I love X2, so seeing anything else like it would be really, really cool, even if it is pretty unlikely. But it is a little strange that Cedar Point never got on the 4th dimension coaster bandwagon. Like, it really took off with the 4D free spins, which I don't think are that great. But the fact that Six Flags values Cedar Point, and the fact that Legacy Six Flags chain added so many 4D coasters, and even Legacy Cedar Fair added one to King's Dominion, I think this might be more possible than it seems on paper. But even then, it's still kind of a long shot. But that's the point of a wish list. So moving up to number 2, we're going with a single rail coaster, maybe a hyper single rail. So obviously there are 2 manufacturers making single rail coasters right now. We got Intamin and we have RMC. I would really love to see a 200-foot tall RMC Raptor coaster. I feel like that would be really, really, really cool. Most people, including myself, prefer the original layout in Railblazer and Golden Lasso coaster over the newer layout with Jersey Devil and Wonder Woman Flight of Courage. So it would be interesting to see if you made the Raptor even taller. Would it continue that trend of being less intense and less extreme, or would it follow the trend of Steel Vengeance, where that's the wildest RMC that's ever been built, or Iron Gwazi, which of course is another hyper coaster. So either way, the hyper iBox coasters are more extreme than the smaller scale iBox coasters. And it seems that Intamin really perfected their single rail model, so I would love to see that. But once again, I am doubtful that Six Flags would work with Intamin. But a single rail is definitely very unique and unlike anything at Cedar Point. But at number 1 is by far the most realistic option. It is a GCI wooden coaster. I feel like this is a great replacement for Snake River Falls. I don't know if this is the path that they're going with, but it would just be absolutely incredible. Like, I love Mystic Timbers, I love Renegade, I love Prowler, I love Thunderhead at Dollywood. Those are some of my favorite wooden coasters ever, and GCI is one of my favorite manufacturers. So if Cedar Point built a GCI Woody, it would be one of the best coasters in the park, which is kind of insane to say. I love my GCI Woody. One more thing that I want to talk about before we wrap up is land. So obviously Cedar Point is on a peninsula, so they're literally landlocked. Like, there's nowhere to expand. It's kind of mind-blowing that they found a plot of land for Sirens Curse like so quickly and so easily. That really blew my mind. Of course, with the removal of Snake River Falls, you have a decent chunk of land towards the back of the park. But going forward, where else can you expand? Especially if Cedar Point is trying to hit 20 coasters, how do you build a roller coaster without taking one out? And one of my major proposals would be to update the parking lot that's on the peninsula. So obviously when you enter Cedar Point, there's the massive parking lot in the front. I'd be very surprised if that ever changes. What blows my mind is that they have a full-scale parking lot like in the back of the park for their water park. It just takes up such a big chunk of the peninsula. So I feel like they should invest in a parking structure just to compact that how much land is dedicated to parking, so that you could expand Cedar Point into that area behind Gemini. Like, obviously you still have to have a road connecting the causeway to Hotel Breakers, but I feel like you could build a bridge or something, or you could have the roller coaster station on the inside part of Perimeter Road and have it just jump over into the existing parking lot for Cedar Point Shores. But I feel like that's a huge chunk of land. You might be able to fit like 2 or 3 different rides, like full-scale rides over there. So I feel like that's a project that Cedar Point should think about at some point. I know there are some cabins back there, so maybe a parking garage would disturb the like nature atmosphere that they're trying to create back there, but I still think it would be a great idea. So this has been a very long and very interesting discussion about Cedar Point. Let me know what you think about this park. How do you feel about Sirens Curse? How do you feel about the other ideas I gave you in this video? Please let me know in the comments below. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will catch you later.